The 10,000 Iteration, Adahis Protocol, inspired by Tony Antonova, Jyotsna Jayaraman, and Ishan Wilson. Episode 1 of 5. I once overheard one of my caretakers call me the 10,000th life. Her voice was filled with awe and a touch of confusion, as though she couldn't quite believe I was still here, or that the entity she addressed had once been an ordinary person in the 21st century. Of course, that was exactly what I was, back when I was truly me. Or so I believed. My original body was born in 2024, and I was named Andrew Muller. I nearly died, 1,000 times in the centuries that followed, only to be saved by the advanced biological and AI-based technologies that the future eventually offered. Each time my body came close to failing, an iteration procedure reconstructed me on a cellular level, preserving what they called my continuous conscious identity. Over time, the process became so routine that I was known, ironically, as the survivor. But in truth, I scarcely remember the experiences that came before my 9,999th iteration, or even the original Andrew Muller from the 21st century. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright in a bed that is nothing like the bed I was born in, tangled in sheets made from metamaterial threads that never tear and never stain. A strange question hammers in my head. Is the continuity real? Am I still that same consciousness, somehow bridging the centuries? Or is my mind just a repeated pattern, a copy of a copy, reprinted so many times that it has lost any original meaning? By the time morning arrives, the question often fades in the bustle of daily life. My environment is a city that's far beyond the dreams of 21st century technology. Floating platforms that house thousands of people, self-contained terraformed communities on the Martian surface, shimmering new continents built upon the ocean. I have lived in all of these, but none feel like home, because my home is in the past, and I can't truly go back. The processes that sustain me are unbelievably advanced. Genetic rewriting, quantum-level neural scanning, and the entire suite of AI-driven biological reconstruction are at my disposal. Over millennia, for yes, more than a millennium has passed since my initial birth year, science has perfected the method of reweaving tissue, re-sparking consciousness at the brink of death, over and over again. The people who preserve me speak softly of a sacred continuity, as though I am a living relic. They remind me that my chain of memory remains unbroken. In principle, I remember every single iteration, every near-death, every emergency integration in a new husk of cloned flesh, every neural graft that smoothed the transition. Yet I feel as though I hold thousands of dusty tomes in my library of memory, but never open them. There is that sense of weight pressing on me, full of recollections I cannot properly revisit because they're too compressed, or too painful, or too alien to who I am at the moment. Instead, I am left drifting, living, and continuing. In this new era, many others have enjoyed longevity, but few possess the extraordinary timeline I do. Some take advantage of partial body reworks or ephemeral rejuvenations. Others have tried neural backups or digital migrations. But the method used on me has remained truly biological in nature, augmented by AI, so that the consciousness thread supposedly never snaps. Where many eventually choose the peaceful oblivion of letting the mind rest permanently, or they shift to purely digital existences, I alone am forced or compelled to go on in a flesh-based continuity. This earned me a reverence in some circles and a quiet condemnation in others. But the result is the same. I exist, iteration after iteration, a living, breathing curiosity spanning centuries. The complication is that recently, perhaps in the last few decades, my sense of time is blurred. I have been seized by a restlessness that won't let me go. I can't stop thinking, what was it really like to be my original self? It's almost a heretical thought in this time. The entire system is designed to ensure continuity. We place such enormous value on the unbroken chain from that original mind to the present. But ironically, I can hardly remember the actual feeling of being Andrew in the year 2045 or 2050, or whenever I still had a chance to look up at the sky and see a simpler world. I want to recall the real textures and tastes of that first life, the young body in a bed in some modest 21st century home, the unaugmented consciousness that had no knowledge of these marvels. I can conjure up images, yes, but they feel sanitized by centuries of re-recording. I want the rawness, the innocence. I suppose the question that really gnaws at me is, if I truly am the same consciousness that started out as Andrew Muller, then somewhere deep within me, that first personality must still reside, right? If so, is there a way to truly experience being that person again? No memories of the future, no knowledge of all these iterations, just that original vantage point? As soon as I asked the question out loud, the caretaker who was with me at the time gave a startled laugh and waved a hand as though shooing away an eccentric request. "But you are that person, Andrew," he said. "You always have been. The neural continuity is perfect, so the original vantage point is you." He paused, then frowned at my expression. "If you mean to revert your memory or your perspective, that could be psychologically dangerous. The technologies that keep you alive have integrated countless updates. Attempting to unravel that might do more harm than good." He was right, of course, but also missing the point. Simply acknowledging that the continuity is intact doesn't help me feel it or relive it. My caretaker left me alone, and I sat in silence, staring at the skyline of this city, an advanced metropolis in Earth's equatorial region, though truly, Earth is hardly recognizable now. The horizon bristles with slender towers built from self-repairing ceramic metal composites, their silhouettes shimmering like artificial crystals. The air is perpetually purified by vast atmospheric generators. There is neither smog nor dryness, just an eerie perfection that's been engineered over centuries. Sometimes I dream of the old Earth, with its dusty roads and dirty skylines, its flawed but real environment. Then I realize how contradictory that must sound to the people of this age. They cannot fathom longing for what they call pre-uplift chaos. But in my mind, that was home, where my earliest memories were formed. I decided I had to find some route inward into my own consciousness to unearth that original self. And it could not merely be a matter of reading old diaries or scanning old data. I needed to inhabit my original vantage point. That was the longing that began to drive me. However, the more I looked into the processes that kept me alive, the more I realized it might not be so simple. My brain, if one can even call it that after all these reconstructions, is an amalgamation of advanced neural tissue, grown from a synergy of 21st century DNA and carefully engineered sequences introduced over thousands of years. My cerebral cortex is laced with quantum-coded nanowires that connect me to a vast AI network. These are used, among other things, to maintain the continuity that so many people revere. All of that is me, intricately layered. If I dared to strip those additions away, would I still be me? Or would I be some catatonic husk, or worse, just an empty shell? Despite these fears, the craving persisted. I was certain there was a path. Such advanced science usually has solutions for any problem. Some rumored labs on the fringes of civilization delve into radical forms of interior mind exploration, using meditative states augmented by neural field modulators. The official, licensed labs will rarely risk tampering with a legendary subject like me, but I knew that the fringes might offer something if I could gain their trust. And so I made inquiries, discreetly at first, in the subtle channels of the city's network. I reached out to certain individuals known for pushing the boundaries of consciousness research. Typically, their practices bordered on what mainstream science calls metaphysical fringe. They are rumored to use resonance fields that can peel back layers of memory and open vantage points deep in the labyrinth of the mind. Weeks passed. At times I would second-guess myself. I told myself perhaps it was a naive quest. Perhaps that caretaker was right, and the continuity is all that matters, not the actual memory of who I was. But something in me refused to let go. Finally, at dawn one day, I received a cryptic message. "I hear you seek your original vantage. Meet me under the radiant pillar at midnight. Come alone. There was no identifying signature, but it was accompanied by subtle markers in the data indicating the message's authenticity. I knew the radiant pillar well. It was an installation in the old quarter of the city, a luminous spire that served as an art piece. I recognized that whoever sent this was intimately familiar with clandestine consciousness work. That night, I found myself gliding through silent streets, with only the low hum of the city's ventilation system and the faint rustle of artificially engineered trees. The radiant pillar was a swirling column of plasma encased in a transparent polymer, about 20 stories tall and visible from miles away. Its glow lit the streets in a pale gold hue. As I approached, I saw a figure leaning against the base, arms folded, face half hidden in shadows. My heart, or its hyper-engineered equivalent, thumped. For the first time in a very long while, I felt an adrenaline rush that seemed purely organic. A small piece of my earliest humanity flickered in that moment. "Andrew Muller," the figure said in a low voice. "Or do you prefer the survivor?" I halted. "I prefer Andrew," I said softly. He nodded. "Of course. My name is Cormac. I represent a group that can help you, if that is truly what you want." He stepped closer, and in the light from the pillar I saw a lean face, older than many in this era. Few people choose to let their hair go silver or adopt the lines of age. This individual did, or else the illusions of age gave him a certain aura of experience and wisdom. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "We have our reasons. The path you seek, journeying back to the vantage of your original self, is not unknown to us. A few have tried. None were quite like you, of course, but it can be done. You must understand there are risks." I swallowed. "I understand. Follow me," he said. Then he turned and began walking, not looking back. We passed under silent archways, deeper into a sector of the old quarter where the city's immaculate polish gave way to older architecture. Buildings here dated back centuries, relics from an earlier time when the morphological style wasn't quite so fluid. Some were half reconstructed from old materials, and others had been left partially in ruin as a testament to Earth's past conflicts. I had rarely ventured here alone, yet something about the quiet and the worn surfaces reminded me of the old world. I found a flicker of comfort in that. Eventually, we reached what appeared to be an abandoned library, a structure with tall pillars etched with symbols of bygone eras. Cormac placed his palm against a section of the wall, and after a brief glow of scanning lights, a hidden doorway slid open. He gestured for me to follow him inside. I saw no guard, no one else, just a long corridor with subtle overhead lights. We walked in silence, the hush punctuated only by our footfalls. At the corridor's end, there was a broad chamber. Within that chamber stood four other figures, each clad in minimal attire, with neural interface bands around their temples that glowed a soft, pulsing turquoise. They turned as we entered, and I felt a collective gaze settle on me. "Here he is," Cormac said. "Andrew Muller, the famed 10,000th iteration." One of the figures, a woman with intricate metallic patterns down one side of her face, bowed slightly. "We have long watched your existence," she said. "We never expected you to come to us, but we are prepared." "Prepared for what, exactly?" I asked. She motioned to the center of the chamber, where a single platform sat, ringed by swirling nodes that resembled large, upright tuning forks. "Prepared to facilitate a journey that can help you re-experience your original vantage." The thought made my stomach lurch. "You say re-experience, but how? Will you simply remove large portions of my memory?" The woman shook her head. "Number erasing memory is not our approach. Instead, we can reconstruct an interior environment that isolates the earliest layer of your identity, temporarily blocking access to later layers. Think of it like diving down, layer by layer, into the ocean of your consciousness. You will not lose anything permanently, but for the duration of the experience, you will truly inhabit that earliest sense of self." Cormac stepped forward. "But be warned, the deeper you go, the more you cut yourself off from your present stability. You may face illusions or psychological schisms. Some never fully reintegrate, and we cannot guarantee you'll like what you find in that original vantage. I took a breath, feeling an unexpected tremor of fear. It occurred to me that the first Andrew Muller had lived in a time of war, or at least of profound anxiety. The mid-21st century had not been an era of calm. Climate chaos, political upheaval, personal struggles. My earliest years might not have been a pleasant place to revisit, but still, the yearning was too strong to ignore. I accept the risks, I whispered. I want this. The group exchanged glances. Then the woman beckoned. Lie on the platform. My heart hammered as I stepped up onto that smooth surface and lay down. The platform automatically adjusted to cradle my form. I felt a faint hum as it aligned with my biometrics. Overhead, the luminous nodes tilted towards me, forming a subtle ring of light around the edges of my vision. One of the others, a tall man with an elongated face, began to chant softly, or maybe it was a form of meditative humming meant to calm me. Close your eyes, the woman instructed. Breathe deeply. Let the process guide you. We will begin by mapping your neural layers in real time. Then we will introduce a carefully modulated field to block the higher-order memories that branch from your earliest experiences. A fine trembling ran through me, not from cold, but from anticipation. The chamber was warm, almost stifling. I smelled incense, or something akin to it, drifting through the air. I closed my eyes. Darkness enveloped me. For a moment I sensed only my own breath. Then, flickers of light danced behind my eyelids. I felt the strangest sensation, as though someone had reached into my mind and begun sifting through my memories like flipping through countless pages of a massive book. The speed was dizzying. I sensed glimpses of my centuries of experience, some flash of a Martian dust storm, the swirl of a cosmic city orbiting Jupiter, the hush of an undersea dome, a celebratory parade on Titan. Then these memories were whisked away, locked behind some invisible door. Gradually, the kaleidoscope slowed. My mind felt lighter, as though entire decades were dropping off. Deeper we went, and I felt a surreal sense of regression. My body twitched involuntarily. I opened my mouth as if to speak, but no words came. In the blackness behind my eyes, I saw faint forms of a smaller life, something that might have been a cramped 21st century apartment. There was a rickety bed, warm sunlight streaming through half-broken blinds, a messy desk, an old computer. The edges of this memory sharpened, became more tangible. The woman's voice came from far away. Do you feel the vantage? I see something, I managed. But I feel younger. My heart, my original heart. Tears stung my eyes. I was losing the sense of the advanced body that had carried me for centuries. Something about me was indeed reverting, at least in a mental sense, to a simpler form. The platform under me shifted, or perhaps I shifted in my mind to a different location entirely. The hum of technology around me faded, and I heard the hum of a cheap air conditioner, a 21st century detail that nearly broke my heart with nostalgia. Then it happened. I opened my eyes, or so it felt, and found myself in a dim, cluttered bedroom. My bedroom from youth. The walls were painted a dull off-white with peeling corners. A single lamp on the desk cast a warm glow over scattered notebooks, cups, and small plastic figurines. My breath caught in my chest. I was lying in bed with a half-rumpled blanket over me. I lifted my hands in front of my face. These were not the genetically perfected hands of my advanced iteration. They were the hands of a young man in his mid-20s, with a small scar on the left knuckle from a childhood tumble. I recognized every detail. I sat up slowly, my heart racing. My lungs felt different, as though the air was heavier. No advanced filtration system purified it. Dust motes floated in the lamplight. My body felt weaker, more fragile, and yet it also felt so profoundly real that I nearly cried out. This was me, the Andrew Muller from centuries ago, or a perfect recreation within my own mind, but it felt identical to the real thing. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The cheap floorboards creaked under my feet. A mirror on the wall reflected my face, younger, unlined, with messy brown hair and tired eyes that had yet to see the wonders of the far future. I noticed my computer, a battered old laptop with a cracked hinge, glowing softly on the desk. The digital clock read 2:13 a.m. The entire place smelled of stale coffee and unwashed laundry. I inhaled deeply, marveling at the sense of authenticity. It was as if I'd truly traveled back in time, but I knew intellectually this was an interior construct. Somewhere beyond this, my far future body lay on that platform. But for the moment, that knowledge was distant. This vantage felt absolutely real. My mouth felt dry. I rummaged for a glass of water on the desk, found one with a bit of water left, and sipped it. Lukewarm, slightly stale. I even gagged a little, exactly as I might have in real life. The detail was astounding. A soft beep sounded from my laptop. The screen lit, and I saw an instant messaging window open. The text read, "Andrew, you awake? We're heading downtown for that protest. You coming or what?" My mind spun. I remembered, faintly, that in my youth I was involved in local protests related to climate policy or something about municipal accountability. How many centuries had it been since I'd thought of that? Outside the window, the dim glow of city lights was visible. The sky was the faint orangish hue of nighttime in a polluted world. Cars occasionally rumbled past. My heart lurched with a bizarre sense of longing. This was it, the realness of the 21st century, with all its flaws and wonders. I typed a reply. "Yeah, I'm up. Wait for me." Then, mechanical memory kicked in, and I rummaged in the closet for a coat. I found an old black jacket, pulled it on, and left the apartment. Even the hallway smelled of musty carpeting. The overhead lights flickered. I walked down the stairs, out onto the street. The city glowed with neon signs and half-working street lamps. Trash cans overflowed. I felt the dampness of a recent rain. My shoes squelched in a small puddle. Across the road, I saw a group of people, my old friends. They waved. One, a short, energetic woman named Stella, yelled, "Come on, Andrew, we're late." "Sorry," I called, jogging across the street. I tried to keep my wits about me. This was all so surreal, but I was also excited. I recognized them, as if meeting them anew, but with the faintest recollection that in the far future these people were long gone. They had never undergone the iterative process. They would have died centuries ago. And yet, here they were alive and real. We piled into a battered old sedan. Stella drove, the engine coughing. As we sped toward downtown, we chatted. I found myself slipping into a familiarity I hadn't felt in ages. The local radio station played a pop song I'd barely recalled until now. I could see the reflection of city lights on wet asphalt. "Do you think it's going to get rough?" said Kyle, the tall friend in the passenger seat. "Heard rumors the cops are on edge tonight." Stella shrugged. "Protests have been big. Everyone's angry about the new industrial expansions. We got to stand up." I chimed in. "Could be dangerous. People are fed up. We might get tear-gassed or worse." Stella gave me a wry smile in the rearview mirror. "You can stay back if you're scared." "Hey, I'm not scared," I retorted, feeling a tiny surge of that old rebellious spirit. "Just want to be ready." The conversation tumbled on. Part of my mind marveled that I was living this scenario again, with the emotional immediacy of a 21st century youth. Another part wondered, how is this possible? Is this purely a memory recreation, or am I forging a new timeline in my head? But it felt too vivid for a mere replay. I realized it was probably a dynamic reconstruction, blending my actual past memories with the simulation algorithms that those consciousness explorers had set in motion. We arrived downtown to a throng of people chanting slogans. Some carried signs condemning corporate greed. Police in riot gear stood in lines. The tension was palpable. The night air smelled of sweat, anger, and desperation. This era was rife with climate catastrophes, mass layoffs, rampant inequality. People took to the streets out of fear and frustration. Even though I knew, from my centuries of knowledge, that eventually humanity would find breakthroughs in technology and society, these protesters had no such reassurance. They believed they fought for a future that might or might not come. I stood with them, chanting, feeling the adrenaline spike. I felt the press of bodies, the surge of collective emotion, something I hadn't genuinely felt in so long. A policeman yelled for us to disperse. The crowd roared in defiance. Then, in a blur, the police advanced. I heard the hiss of tear gas canisters, saw plumes of stinging smoke envelop the front lines. People scattered, tripping and screaming. I coughed, eyes burning, stumbling backward. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest, my normal human chest of the 21st century. For a moment, I forgot everything about my advanced future existence. I was just Andrew, frightened and outraged, trying not to get trampled. "Andrew, over here!" Stella's voice cut through the chaos. She grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a concrete barrier. We coughed, tears streaming from the gas. She pressed a damp cloth to my face. "Keep your head down," she whispered. I nodded, eyes watering. I glanced around, disoriented, trying to see if Kyle was nearby. More canisters flew overhead, arcs of tear gas drifting like malevolent fireworks. The police line advanced in riot formation, shields raised. A few protesters threw bottles or stones. Someone lit a trash bin on fire. The scene was raw, real, terrifying. Eventually, we scrambled into a side alley to escape the worst of the crackdown. A small group of us huddled there, panting. A woman was tending to a protester with a bleeding forehead. Stella cursed under her breath. "This is insane," she said. "They can't do this to us. We're just—" She didn't finish. Overhead, a police drone hovered, shining a spotlight. We froze. Then someone yelled, "Run!" The group scattered again. I sprinted down the alley, Stella's hand in mine. My lungs burned from the gas. My vision blurred. Everything was chaotic, vivid, and horrifying. Yet amid the confusion, I felt more alive than I had in centuries. I remembered that the 21st century was often messy and violent, filled with injustices that had once outraged me. We ended up cowering behind a set of dumpsters until the drone passed. We heard the thud of footsteps receding. Finally, we dared to emerge. Stella turned to me, tears still drying on her cheeks. "Andrew, let's go home. There's nothing we can do right now. They've pushed everyone out." I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, okay. Let's get Kyle." She shook her head. "I lost him in the crowd. He'll manage. Let's just go." In a daze, we made our way back to the car. It had a smashed rear window from a stray projectile. We got in, started it up. Stella drove in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I stared out the window, watching the battered streets roll by. When we finally returned to my neighborhood, Stella parked in front of my building. She turned off the engine and let out a shuddering breath. "Damn them," she muttered. "We have to keep fighting somehow. But every time we go out there, they just—" She exhaled loudly and looked at me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Are you?" She shrugged. "I will be. I feel so powerless, you know?" I nodded. We sat in tense silence. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for being there with me." I squeezed back. "Any time." She looked like she wanted to say something more, but then just nodded. "Go get some rest. Tomorrow. We'll figure out next steps." I nodded again, then opened the car door. My legs felt shaky as I stepped onto the curb. "Good night," I managed, shutting the door behind me. Stella pulled away into the darkness, the car's broken back window flapping in the wind. Inside my building, the hallway was quiet, stale. I climbed the stairs, let myself into my tiny apartment, and flicked on the single overhead light. The reality of what I'd just experienced sank in. Exhaustion weighed on me. I collapsed on the bed, not even bothering to remove my jacket. I stared at the ceiling. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. I felt the adrenaline recede, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a swirl of thoughts. These were my old problems: a sense of injustice, fear of the future, fleeting hopes that something might change. All of it felt heartbreakingly real, as though the centuries of progress that I knew lay ahead had melted away. I recognized that, for the Andrew I was right now, the future was uncertain. Slowly, I recalled that I was living inside a carefully orchestrated interior journey. Part of me wanted to leap up and shout, "I'm from the future." All of this chaos eventually leads to dramatic transformations. But that knowledge felt distant, faint. My current vantage overshadowed it with immediacy. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, mind churning with images of riot police, tear gas, Stella's fearful eyes, the glow of city lights on wet pavement. In my dreams, the advanced world I had come from beckoned me, but I didn't want to leave. I wanted to see how tomorrow would unfold. For the first time in centuries, I was living day to day instead of coasting across millennia. When morning came, pale daylight filtered through the blinds. I woke with a stiff neck, half-dressed. Slowly, I sat up, rubbing my eyes. My apartment looked slightly less grim in the daylight, but still cluttered and cramped. I checked my phone, an old rectangular slab, not the direct neural interface I would one day have. I saw messages from multiple friends, some describing run-ins with police, some describing injuries. Others wanted to plan the next protest. My nerves tensed again. I realized that in this vantage, I was expected to continue living Andrew's 21st century life, challenges and all. A soft knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Stella there, looking haggard. "Hey," she said. "Mind if I come in?" "Sure," I replied, stepping aside. She slid past me. She flopped onto my couch, letting out a shaky breath. "How are you holding up?" I sank into a nearby chair. "I'm okay, I think. Still feels surreal." She nodded. "Everything feels surreal to me too." She leaned her head back, staring at the ceiling. "Sometimes I wonder if the future will ever get better, or if this is our reality for good." I hesitated, wanting to tell her that I knew it would get better in some ways, that the people of Earth would eventually harness extraordinary technologies, that the planet would endure, that humans would colonize space, that even if the journey was bumpy, there would be breakthroughs and transformations unimaginable now. But I was Andrew, living in the 21st century, so I responded with only a sigh. "We can't give up, though, can we?" Stella shook her head. "Number, we can't." She eyed me. "You really believe that?" "I do," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. For that moment, I really did believe it. She gave me a wan smile. "Good. We need more of that." Then, after a pause, she rose from the couch. "I'm supposed to meet some folks about a legal fund for the people who got arrested last night. Want to come?" "Sure," I said, without thinking, because this was my life, apparently. So we set off together. The day was a haze of phone calls, tense meetings in cramped cafes, and half-baked plans to launch crowdfunding campaigns, 21st century activism in action. As we hustled around, I felt a faint glow inside me, a sense of purpose. This was a far cry from the sterile halls of the future, where I often felt like a relic, drifting among people who had outgrown the world I once knew. Here, everything was immediate, uncertain, but also vibrant. Late in the afternoon, we ended up at a friend's apartment. A group of protesters were gathered around a table, discussing strategies. Stella introduced me to a few people I didn't know well. One of them was a slight, nervous man with glasses named Elliot. He seemed older, maybe in his early 30s, and he had a determined look in his eye. He was an organizer, apparently. During a lull in conversation, Elliot turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wonder where all this leads? I mean, we protest and protest, but the big machine just keeps turning." I met his gaze, feeling a pang of insight that I couldn't share. You never know what might spark change. Even if we can't see the results immediately, we might be laying groundwork. He considered that, nodding slowly. "Groundwork, huh?" "Exactly." Elliot cracked a small smile. "Well, I hope you're right, man. I really do." Our conversation ended when Stella called the group to attention. We hammered out plans for the next rally, exchanging contact information. Then, as dusk fell, people trickled out. I lingered for a moment. My eyes were drawn to a dirty window that overlooked a row of rooftops, beyond which the city lights were beginning to glow. It struck me how small and battered everything was. My advanced mind knew that the future would bring radical new architecture, floating cities, space colonies. But in this vantage, all I had was the here and now, gritty and fragile. It was beautiful in its own stubborn way. Stella touched my shoulder, pulling me from my reverie. "Andrew?" "Sorry," I said. "Just thinking." She smiled. "You've been different lately. Quieter, more introspective. I noticed last night, too. Something on your mind?" A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in me. "I'm just reevaluating some things," I said, "trying to figure out who I want to be." She squeezed my shoulder gently. "I get it. It's been a rough time. We're all just trying to find a way." I nodded, touched by her concern. But behind my eyes I felt a flicker of something else, a presence, a faint glimmer that reminded me this was all a constructed experience. For a moment I sensed the hum of the future platform, the eyes of the consciousness explorers scanning me. It was as though a ghostly voice whispered, "Don't forget who you really are." But that voice was faint, and I pushed it aside. I let Stella lead me back into the conversation. She was right. We were all just trying to find a way in the chaotic reality of the 21st century. That night, I returned to my tiny apartment, exhausted. I sank onto the bed, fully dressed, and the events of the day swirled in my mind. It all felt so real. In that final moment before sleep, a question bobbed to the surface. How long would this journey last, and what would it ultimately reveal? I continued living like that for what seemed like weeks. Each day, I woke to the cramped apartment, the stale air, the flickering overhead light. I got used to the hum of the city outside my window, the constant swirl of protests and urgent activism. I found moments of camaraderie with Stella and the others, late-night brainstorming sessions in dimly lit coffee shops. We faced down police lines, distributed flyers, posted on social media, scrounged for money and resources. I re-experienced a slice of my old life that I had all but forgotten. Yet I was more aware, more attuned. I saw the pained faces of the homeless on the streets, the mothers trying to shield their children from the tear gas, the desperation in everyone's eyes. I felt my own fear and determination blend in a messy tangle. One night, exhausted and alone in my apartment, I found my gaze drifting to a small, framed photograph on the desk. It was a photo of my mother, who died of cancer in my mid-20s, before I ever became the survivor. She was smiling in the photo, standing in a sunlit backyard. The sight of her face stabbed me with longing. I realized with a jolt that in the centuries that followed, I had rarely paused to revisit my mother's memory. It was lost in the avalanche of experiences. And here she was, right in front of me, smiling. I wanted to weep. "Mom," I whispered, running my finger over the glass. My chest tightened with grief. In the advanced future, I had known so many wonders, but I had lost the immediacy of such personal love and pain. I regretted how rarely I'd thought of her, but now, in this vantage, I ached for her presence every day. A sudden wave of determination swept over me. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and found an old number I'd never dared to call in my original timeline, my mother's number, still saved. I hit dial, my hand shaking. The line rang, crackling. Then a recorded voice. "We're sorry, this number is no longer in service." I closed my eyes, tears welling up. Of course. She'd passed a while back. That phone line wouldn't magically connect me to her. It hit me how ephemeral everything was. I pressed the phone to my forehead, swallowing back the tears. Then, out of sheer desperation, I whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I hope you're at peace. I, I wish I could have done more for you. I wish you could see that we do find a way, eventually." Those words hung in the air. My mind drifted, and I felt a faint shift again, as though the simulation quivered. A voice deep inside me said, "Remember, Andrew, this is not truly your present reality." But again, it was the faintest echo. Days blended into nights, filled with the raw life of the 21st century. Over time, I realized I was not just replaying old events. Some of these experiences felt entirely new. Was my mind weaving fresh scenarios out of the era's conditions? Possibly. The consciousness explorers might have given me a sandbox of sorts, letting me live as 21st century Andrew for as long as the journey needed. And I was fully immersed. Eventually, I was drawn into a particularly violent protest where the tension broke into full-blown riots. Police used shock batons. There were mass arrests. Storefronts were smashed. I found myself in the middle of it, pinned against a wall by a riot officer. I tried to shield myself, tasting blood in my mouth when the baton cracked against my lip. My vision blurred. Fear hammered in my skull. This was no sanitized future conflict. This was raw, immediate violence. I screamed in pain, expecting to pass out. Then, abruptly, everything froze. Time itself seemed to stand still. The riot officer's mask was inches from my face, baton raised. Debris hung in the air as though caught in an invisible net. The background noise fell away, replaced by a profound silence. My heart hammered, and I blinked. I stepped back, and my surroundings were frozen in place like a paused hologram. Then, from behind the officer, a slender figure emerged, wearing the robes of the consciousness explorers I'd met in the future. I recognized the woman with the metallic pattern down her face. "Andrew," she said softly, "we must speak." Shock coursed through me. "How? What is—" She stepped closer, glancing at the frozen riot. "You have gone quite deep into this vantage. We have allowed it to unfold, shaping itself around your original self. But we have come to a critical juncture. We must know if you wish to remain longer, or if you wish to explore further." I stared around at the chaotic, frozen scene. My lips still stung, blood dripping from the corner of my mouth, but that pain now felt strangely distant. I've been here for weeks," I said. "I almost forgot that I'm from another time." She nodded. "Yes, that is a sign of how immersive this vantage is. We can let you continue. Indeed, you could live out a life here as your younger self, though it would remain a construct in the deeper layers of your consciousness. Or we can guide you deeper, to a place where even more primal memories dwell. There you might discover what truly drives your quest. Or you may decide to ascend back to your future iteration." I felt torn. A part of me wanted to remain with Stella and the others, to keep fighting for a better future, to hold on to the rawness of being human in a flawed era. Another part of me longed to reconcile this vantage with the centuries of life I had experienced afterward. She studied me, her eyes gentle. "Think carefully. We can't hold time frozen here for long. If you wish to remain, the simulation will resume, and you will continue living in your 21st century vantage. If you wish to go deeper, you must come with me now." In that frozen instant, I closed my eyes. My breath trembled. I thought of Stella's kindness, the fleeting sense of belonging I'd found, and I remembered my mother's photograph. Then I remembered the caretaker in the advanced future, telling me that meddling in these layers was dangerous. But there was a deeper question unanswered. Would this vantage quell my longing, or was there something else I still needed to understand? I opened my eyes. "I need to go deeper." She nodded, sadness in her gaze. "Then follow." She turned, walking into the frozen crowd. I followed, stepping through statues of screaming protesters. My heart pounded as we moved beyond them, the street dissolving into a haze of shadows and flickering lights. The city blurred, shapes melting into an inky darkness. I felt a lurch, as though stepping off an edge into an infinite black void. Then I was standing in another place, an empty plain of swirling lights, with the robed woman beside me. No sign of the riot, no sign of Stella or the 21st century. My breath sounded loud in the stillness. "You have set aside that vantage," the woman said. "Now we travel to an even earlier place, the origin of your longing." A prickle of fear ran through me. earlier. But I thought the 21st century was my original vantage. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her gaze burning. Your vantage as an adult, yes, but the earliest seeds of your identity lie in your childhood, or perhaps even deeper, in the intangible swirl of your earliest consciousness. Do you dare go that far back? My throat felt tight. I recalled fleeting images of being a child, a simpler time, overshadowed by confusion and newness. Did I want to live through that again? I do, I whispered, if it gives me answers. Without another word, she led me forward. The swirling lights coalesced again, forming shapes, colors, edges. I felt myself shrinking inward, a sense of my adult mind unraveling. Fear threatened to swallow me, but then the shapes firmed into a different reality. I opened my eyes to find myself on a living room floor, the 21st century living room from my childhood. Toys were scattered about. The TV blared cartoons. I recognized the battered couch, the coffee table with chipped corners. A soft morning light streamed through a window. I was small, maybe 6 or 7. My limbs felt tiny, my perspective low to the ground. My heart pounded in confusion. Then I heard a voice. "Andy, honey, breakfast is almost ready." I turned. My mother stood in the doorway, smiling. She was younger than in that photograph, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans. My breath caught. "Mum," I murmured, voice high and small. She laughed. "Don't mom me in that tone, kiddo. Come on, wash your hands. Scrambled eggs today." I stared at her, tears threatening to well up. But I was a child, and the child's vantage soon swept me up. My mother turned and walked to the kitchen. I got up, followed, my little legs scurrying. The warmth of that moment was overwhelming. I barely noticed the robed woman from the future anywhere. Perhaps she was gone, leaving me to explore this vantage on my own. In the kitchen, the table was set for 2. My father wasn't around. He'd left us when I was very young, if my adult memory serves. At that moment, I barely registered it. I scrambled into a chair. My mother put a plate of eggs and toast in front of me, gave me a glass of milk. The smell was comforting. She sat across from me with her own plate. We ate, chatting about childish things, cartoons, the weather, a friend's birthday party. I hung on every word, heart nearly bursting with love and longing. This was the mother I'd lost so many centuries ago. She glanced up, noticing my teary eyes. "Andy, baby, what's wrong?" I hesitated. My child's voice trembled. I love you, Mum." She smiled gently, reaching across to ruffle my hair. "I love you too. But why the tears, sweetheart?" I shook my head, not knowing how to explain, so I just reached out, and she took my hand. We sat there like that, and I felt more at peace than I had in 1,000 lifetimes. The days that followed in this vantage blurred into a child's routine, going to school, playing with friends, returning home to my mother's embrace. The sense of wonder at everyday things was so strong. I realized how crucial these formative experiences were to my identity, how they shaped the adult I became. And I remembered that my mother died when I was 8, taken by an aggressive cancer that we couldn't afford to treat properly in that era. Sure enough, after some time in this vantage, a time both blissful and overshadowed by dread, I noticed signs of her illness. She began to cough, to lose weight. I saw her trying to hide the pain behind a brave face. Tears welled in me because I knew how it would end. I remembered that day in the hospital when she said goodbye. But now I was living it again, this time with the perspective of centuries, and it tore me apart. The day we took her to the hospital for the last time, my child's vantage was shaken by fear. I sat in a hospital hallway, hugging a worn teddy bear. I overheard nurses talking about how it might only be a matter of days. I was alone, trembling. At some point, the robed woman from the future appeared again. She approached me quietly, knelt down. "Andrew," she said softly, using my adult name, "you don't have to go through this." I shook my head, hugging the teddy bear tighter. "Yes, I do. This is part of who I am, who I was." She gave me a sad look. "As you wish. But be mindful. Pain can anchor you in a vantage. If you stay too long, you may not want to return. I swallowed hard, tears streaming. I need to see it. Let me see it. She stood, fading into the background. I found my way to my mother's bedside. Machines beeped softly. She looked pale, breathing shallowly. I climbed into the chair by her side, my eyes welling with tears. "Mommy," I said, voice trembling. She opened her eyes, smiled weakly. "Hey, baby, don't cry. I'll be okay." I sniffled. "They said you're really sick." She forced a smile. "Just a little sick. Don't worry." But even as a child, I wasn't fooled. I laid my head on her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. My tears dripped onto the white hospital sheets. Over the next minutes, hours, time lost all meaning. My mother drifted in and out of consciousness. Finally, there was a moment when she squeezed my hand gently. "Andy, I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "No matter what happens, you keep on living, okay?" That last phrase echoed in my mind, vibrating with the weight of centuries. Keep on living. It was as if her words transcended time, acknowledging the unimaginable path I would take. Living iteration after iteration, surviving longer than anyone could dream. A soft sigh escaped her lips. Her eyes closed. The monitors emitted a steady, ominous tone. I sobbed uncontrollably, half aware that somewhere in the far future, I was also crying. At length, the figure in robes reappeared, gently pulling me back from the bedside. My mother lay still, peaceful, all pain gone. My child's heart felt crushed. "You have seen enough," the robed woman murmured. "Come now." I resisted, clinging to the sheets. "No, I want to stay," I whimpered, but I felt the vantage dissolving around me. The hospital room blurred, the walls fading. I called out, "Mom." My voice echoed. Then everything turned to darkness, and I felt myself spinning. When the spinning ceased, I found myself curled in a fetal position on the floor of that broad chamber in the old quarter, back in my advanced adult body, tears flowing. The robed woman and the others stood around me, their expressions solemn. The tall man with the elongated face knelt and placed a hand on my back. "You have gone deep," he said quietly. I sniffled, sitting up, my cheeks wet. That was everything I lost, and I can't ever truly get it back." He nodded. "And yet, that origin shapes your longing, does it not?" I gulped down air, trying to steady myself. My mother's last words. She told me to keep on living. I laughed bitterly through my tears. I guess I did. Iteration after iteration. Cormac stepped forward from the shadows. "And now you have witnessed the raw core of your identity. You have the vantage that you sought. You have lived the original vantage anew, and even deeper than that. Do you feel complete?" I closed my eyes, thinking of the protest lines, the tear gas, Stella's determination, my mother's love, her death. It was all swirling inside me. Did I feel complete, or did I feel shattered? Perhaps both. After a moment, I whispered, "I'm not sure." The woman with the metallic face said gently, "Then it is time to reintegrate. We will guide you back to your normal state, to the 10,000th iteration. You will retain the insights you've gained, though the immediacy of the vantage will fade." I bowed my head. "Okay," I murmured. "Take me back." The group formed a circle, chanting softly. I felt the hum of energy as the swirling lights rose, enveloping me in a glimmering haze. My body tensed, and my mind felt like it was expanding outward, rushing through centuries, all the memories piling back on, iteration after iteration. The synergy of advanced biology and AI reasserted itself. My consciousness soared. Then I was lying once again on the platform, back in the hidden library chamber. The swirling nodes powered down, a final flash of turquoise pulsing through the air. My chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. Cormac bent over me, offering a gentle hand. I gripped it, pulling myself upright. "How long?" I asked hoarsely. His eyes flickered with sympathy. 3 hours in our world, For you, subjectively, it was much longer. I took a moment to steady myself on the platform's edge. My memories of the interior journeys were intact, fresh as new wounds. I brushed my face, feeling tears still there. So, Cormac said softly, you found what you were seeking. I swallowed, my throat raw. I found the vantage. I lived it. But it was so much more than I expected. The woman with the metallic face nodded. Your longing was rooted not only in your adult perspective, but in the loss that shaped you from childhood. You have now touched that origin. We hope it gives you peace. I tried to stand. My legs wobbled. Another of the robed figures caught my arm, steadying me. I thanked them softly. Cormac looked at me with a curious expression. So what now, Andrew? Will you continue as the survivor, or will you seek an end to your iterations? Some choose to let go after seeing what you saw. My mind reeled. Let go? After everything, could I choose to end the centuries of continuity, release the tether of existence that so many revere? I remembered my mother's final words. Keep on living. That was what she wanted for me. But how long should one live? After a moment, I squared my shoulders, standing a bit straighter. I need some time, I said. But I think my mother's last words still resonate. They inclined their heads. Cormac extended a small device toward me, shaped like a smooth pebble. Take this. If you ever wish to delve again, or if you need our guidance, activate it. We will find you. I took it, clutching it in my hand. Thank you, I said with genuine gratitude. Thank you for giving me that gift. He bowed slightly. Go in peace. I left the hidden chamber, making my way back through the corridors, back into the quiet night of the old quarter. The radiant pillar still glowed in the distance. My mind felt heavy with the experiences I had just undergone. Part of me yearned to run back to the vantage of 21st century Andrew, or even to that child's vantage, and stay there forever. But that was impossible. My real existence was here, in this advanced era, as the 10,000th iteration. When I emerged onto the street, I paused, looking up at the city's towering spires. The air was clean, the sky dotted with thousands of shimmering drone lanterns that replaced the old streetlights. A gentle hum from a nearby public transport disc reminded me how far civilization had come. I walked slowly, noticing the emptiness of the late hour. Memories pressed in on me, so sharp they felt like knives. The tear gas, the heartbreak, my mother's hospital room, her final words. I realized I was crying again, silently, tears running down my cheeks. But this time, it felt like a cleansing sadness, not the numb despair I'd carried for centuries. Eventually, I reached my home, a sleek habitation tower with glass walls that overlooked the city. My living quarters were spacious and immaculate, a stark contrast to that cramped 21st century apartment. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me. The lights automatically adjusted to a soothing glow, scanning my biometrics. I sank onto the nearest chair, letting out a long exhale. The city below sparkled with advanced beauty, yet I was still haunted by images of battered buildings, flickering street lamps, and protesters refusing to be silenced. I realized I now carried those memories more vividly than ever, not as a fleeting recollection, but as a real, lived experience. I put a hand to my chest, feeling my advanced heartbeat. It was a heart that had endured countless iterations, but it pulsed with the same longing that had once driven a 21st century young man to fight for a better tomorrow. And I realized the irony, that tomorrow had arrived in all its advanced splendor, yet it hadn't erased the pain or the memory of the struggles. Perhaps that was the point. My mother wanted me to keep on living, and that legacy shaped the entire arc of my life, carrying me through 10,000 survivals. But her words also reminded me that living meant more than merely existing. It meant remembering the roots, honoring the vantage that started it all. Sleep eventually claimed me. My dreams were a mixture of past and future, swirling together. When I woke the next morning, I felt oddly lighter. For better or worse, I'd found what I sought, though I still wasn't entirely sure how to integrate it all. A quiet determination flickered within me, reminiscent of the child who had once refused to give up hope, or the protester who believed in a better world. I rose from my bed, showered, and dressed in the sleek garments that marked this era. My reflection in the mirror revealed a face that was youthful, yet impossibly old. My eyes held the knowledge of centuries, and now that knowledge had a renewed depth. I thought of Stella, Elliot, Kyle, and all the others from my interior journey. They were echoes, illusions perhaps, but also real in the sense that they'd once lived in my life. Stepping into my living area, I gazed at the sunrise over the futuristic skyline. I decided I would continue my existence, iteration after iteration, for as long as I could find meaning in it. But something had changed. I no longer felt like an empty vessel drifting on the tides of time. I carried the vantage of my original self, the memory of who I truly was and why I kept living. Thus began the next phase of my unending life, with the newfound knowledge of where I came from and the heartfelt reminder that, no matter how many times my flesh was renewed, the seed of Andrew Muller still pulsed at the core of my being.